November 12, 1954, 11:47 p.m. Wells Restaurant and Bar, Harlem, New York. The air in Wells was thick with the ghosts of good meals and the promise of late-night jazz. Chicken and waffles, the house specialty, left a lingering sweetness that clung to the velvet ropes and dark wood paneling. It was a sanctuary, a place where the kings of Harlem could be men among their own, their crowns of reputation resting easy on their heads. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, the undisputed monarch of this concrete kingdom, sat at his usual table in the back, the one with a clear view of the door and a discreet proximity to the exit. The clinking of ice in his glass of scotch was a quiet metronome marking the rhythm of his domain. He was a man built of quiet intensity, his stillness more commanding than another man's roar. His suit was tailored, a charcoal gray armor of success, his gaze a placid, dark lake that hid unfathomable depths. Beside him, his most trusted lieutenant, Junius Junie Bird, nursed a beer, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a man whose life depended on noticing the out-of-place note in a familiar symphony. Tonight, the symphony was dissonant. The note was a man, white, with a face like curdled milk and the cheap suit of a downtown bill collector who'd taken a wrong turn and decided he liked the view. He'd been at the bar for an hour, his presence a stone in the shoe of the establishment's easygoing ambience. He wasn't a cop. He was too loud, too arrogant. He was a tourist of another race's reality, and he was drunk on the novelty of it all. The man, whose name nobody knew or cared to learn, pushed himself off his stool. He swayed, a wrecking ball on a frayed rope, and began to navigate the tables toward the back, toward Bumpy. Junie's hand tensed on his bottle, his knuckles white. Bumpy gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture as final as a judge's gavel. Control. Everything was about control. The man stopped at their table, looming. The smell of cheap gin and stale cigarettes rolled off him like a toxic fog. Well, he slurred, his voice a grating caricature of authority. If it ain't the king of the spooks himself. Bumpy Johnson. He said the name like he was spitting out something foul. Heard you run this whole part of town. Must be nice, playing king in a big, old monkey cage. The room went silent. The clinking of glasses stopped. The low hum of conversation died. The jazz trio on the small stage faltered, a saxophone letting out a wounded squawk before falling quiet. Every eye was on Bumpy. This was more than an insult. It was a test. A public challenge on his home turf. In his world, a king who couldn't protect his own throne, even from a drunken fool, was no king at all. Bumpy didn't move. He slowly raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the low light. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving the man's blotchy face. He saw not a man, but a symbol, the embodiment of the sneering, condescending world that existed just a few blocks south, the world that saw him and everyone in this room as something less than human, a temporary amusement. His entire life had been a war against that sentiment, fought with numbers rackets, muscle, and a fearsome intellect. Yet here it was, in his sanctuary, stinking of gin and ignorance. And then, Bumpy Johnson did the last thing anyone expected. A slow smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a chilling, razor-thin smirk that didn't touch his eyes. The eyes were cold, calculating, locking the man in a block of ice. "Son," Bumpy said, his voice a low, gravelly purr. "You're a long way from home, and you've had a little too much to drink. Why don't you let your feet carry you back downtown before you say something you can't take back?" The man, emboldened by drink and the lack of immediate violence, laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "Can't take back? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You can wear all the fancy suits you want." At the end of the day, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried through the dead-silent room. "You're still just a nigger in a white man's world." The smirk on Bumpy's face didn't waver. It was as if the slur had bounced off an invisible shield. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. He took another sip of his scotch. "Junie," he said, his voice still impossibly calm. "Pay my tab. It seems the entertainment for the evening is over." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the door. He didn't look back. He moved with the unhurried grace of a predator that knows its prey is already dead. The drunken man, confused by the anticlimax, sputtered, shouting after him, "That's right. Run on home, boy. The door to Wells swung shut behind Bumpy, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. The headline was already writing itself in the minds of the patrons, in the whispers that would ripple through Harlem's streets by sunrise. White supremacist taunts Bumpy at the bar, Bumpy Smirks. The story would end there for most. But for Bumpy Johnson, the story was just beginning. November 13th, 1954. 1:12 a.m. Bumpy Johnson's brownstone, St. Nicholas Avenue. The heavy oak door closed behind him, shutting out the city. The silence of the house was different from the silence in the bar. This was a sanctuary of peace, not of tension. His wife, Mamie, was waiting in the parlor, a book resting in her lap, the soft light of a reading lamp haloing her concerned face. She knew him better than anyone. She could read the weather in his posture, the storm in the set of his jaw. "Ellsworth?" she asked, her voice gentle. He forced the smirk back onto his face, a mask he was growing tired of wearing. "Just a little trouble at the restaurant. Nothing to worry about." He loosened his tie, the silk feeling like a noose. She stood and walked to him, her hand coming up to touch his cheek. Her touch was an anchor in the hurricane raging inside him. "Don't lie to me, Ellsworth. I hear things. The phone's been ringing since you left Wells." He turned away, walking to the liquor cabinet, his back to her. He poured a brandy, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. He saw his reflection in the dark wood of the cabinet, the impeccable suit, the confident posture, all of it a lie. The reflection's eyes were filled with a terrifying, helpless rage. For the first time that night, the mask cracked. The control shattered. His powerful shoulders slumped. The glass trembled in his hand, the brandy sloshing over the rim. He rested his forehead against the cool wood, his eyes squeezed shut. He was Bumpy Johnson. He had faced down Dutch Schultz's army. He had outsmarted federal agents. He had built an empire from dust and nerve. He could order a man's death with a nod, and with another, ensure his family would be cared for forever. He had power. But tonight, in that bar, a drunken piece of trash had stripped all of it away with a single, filthy word. He had reduced him, in front of his own people, to nothing more than the color of his skin. The system he had fought, the one he had built his own parallel system to defy, had walked right into his home and spat in his face. And the worst part? The only thing he could do was smirk. To react with violence, there would have been a tactical error, bringing the full, crushing weight of a racist police force and a biased justice system down on his entire operation. To show weakness would have invited challenges from every hungry wolf in the city. So he had absorbed the blow, and it was poisoning him from the inside out. Mamie came up behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist. She didn't say anything. She just held him. In her arms, the king of Harlem was just a man, trembling with a fury so profound it threatened to tear him apart. He wasn't crying. Tears were too simple a release for this kind of wound. It was a dry, silent agony, a vibration of pure, unadulterated hate that shook the very foundations of his soul. This was his emotional breakdown, witnessed by the only person on earth he allowed to see past the armor. Witness testimony, Junius, Junie Bird. Recorded October 1988. I saw him walk out of Wells that night. Everybody saw the smirk. They thought it was class. They thought it was control. It was. But it was the kind of control you see in a pressure cooker right before it blows. I got in the car with him, and he didn't say a word the whole ride to his place. Just stared straight ahead. The streetlights would pass over his face, and for a second, I'd see it. In his eyes. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. This was cold. It was the fire you get at the bottom of a glacier. I'd seen him mad before. I'd seen him kill a man, and his eyes weren't as cold as they were that night. He was looking at something far away. He was looking at the whole damn world and finding it guilty. When he got out of the car, he just said, "Go home, Junie. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a busy day." I knew right then. Somebody was going to pay. Not just the drunk. The drunk was a symptom. Bumpy was going to war with the disease. November 13th, 1954. 9 a.m. Office above the J&L bar, 125th Street. The office was modest for a king. A large desk, a few chairs, and a wall of filing cabinets that held the real ledgers of his empire. Bumpy stood at the window, looking down at the morning bustle of Harlem. The sun was out, but he felt no warmth. The rage from the night before had cooled, hardened into something dense and purposeful. It was a diamond of hate, sharp enough to cut through anything. Junie and two of his best men, Finley and Pops, stood waiting. They knew better than to speak. The man from the bar, Bumpy began, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The white man. I want him. We're already on it, Bumpy, Junie said. Pop's got a name from the bartender. Frank Miller. Lives somewhere downtown. Works off the books at the docks when he can get it. That's not good enough, Bumpy said, turning from the window. His eyes were voids. I don't want to know where he lives. I want to know where he is. Right now? I want to know what he ate for breakfast. I want to know the name of the dog that pisses on the fire hydrant outside his building. I want every man we have on the street. Every numbers runner, every lookout, every doorman who owes us a favor. I want this city turned upside down until he falls out of its pocket. Find him. It was an all-hands mobilization. The command went out through the intricate web of Bumpy's organization. The search wasn't just for a man. It was a reassertion of power. A message had to be sent, not just to the Frank Millers of the world, but to his own people. The king protects his own. The king avenges insults to his kingdom. November 13th, 1954. 2:45 p.m. A newsstand on Lenox Avenue. Junie brought him the afternoon edition of the New York Daily News. He'd found it while coordinating the search. Bumpy took the paper, his eyes scanning the pages. There, buried on page 14, was a small column filler. Minor disturbance at Harlem night spot. It described an unidentified white man being escorted out after a verbal altercation with local businessman Ellsworth Johnson. The article made it sound like a trivial affair, a footnote. But it was the tone that curdled Bumpy's blood. The implication was clear. The black businessman was the source of the trouble, his very presence and incitement. The system wasn't just indifferent. It was complicit. This was the false alarm. The moment of realizing no help would ever come from that world. They wouldn't just let a man like Miller insult him. They would implicitly defend his right to do so. The paper was a confirmation of everything he already knew, a fresh layer of salt on a gaping wound. He crumpled the newspaper in his fist, the cheap paper groaning under the pressure. The search was no longer just about revenge. It was about justice. His justice. The only kind he could trust. November 13th, 1954. 8:19 p.m. A pool hall in Hell's Kitchen. The countdown continued. The city was a grid, and Bumpy's men were moving through it, square by square. Tips came in, whispers from informants. Miller was a ghost. He hadn't been to his usual haunts. He hadn't shown up at the docks. Bumpy sat in his office, a map of Manhattan spread across his desk. He was a general, moving unseen armies. But with every passing hour, the tension grew. The insult was festering. News of it was spreading. He could feel the questioning eyes on the street, the whispers in the barber shops. Did you hear what that Peckerwood said to Bumpy? And he just smiled. His reputation, the very foundation of his power and his family's safety, was eroding with every tick of the clock. This wasn't a race against Miller's escape. It was a race against his own irrelevance. He thought of his daughter, Elise. He was building this dangerous world so she could one day be safe from it, insulated by his money and power. But what good was any of it if a man like Miller could walk up and declare it all worthless with a single word? The search was for her, too. It was for her future, a future where no one would dare say that word to her. November 14th, 1954. 2:13 a.m. A flop house on West 46th Street. The call came just after 2. A junkie who owed Pops a marker had seen a man matching Miller's description stumbling into a dilapidated tenement, a place where men went to disappear. Bumpy drove himself, with Junie beside him. The building stood like a rotten tooth in the jawbone of the city. The door was unlocked, hanging on a single hinge. The stench hit them first, a vile cocktail of unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, urine, and despair. It was the smell of forgotten men. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, the wood groaning under their feet. The junkie had said room 3B. The door was ajar. Bumpy pushed it open. The room was barely a closet, containing a single cot with a stained mattress, a bucket in the corner, and a swarm of flies buzzing around a half-empty bottle of rot-gut wine. And on the cot, passed out in a tangle of filthy blankets, was Frank Miller. This was the near-death discovery, not of a loved one, but of an idea. Bumpy had expected to find a monster, a titan of hatred. Instead, he found this. A pathetic, sallow-skinned man, snoring loudly, his mouth agape, reeking of his own failure. The squalor of the room was a perfect reflection of the squalor of his soul. This was the face of the great, powerful white world that had judged him. This sniveling, broken creature? The sheer banality of it was more shocking than any monstrous caricature could have been. The discovery was not that his enemy was powerful, but that he was pathetic. And that, somehow, made the insult even worse. That something so small, so utterly insignificant, could wield a word with the power to wound a king. Bumpy stepped into the room, his fine leather shoes silent on the grimy floorboards. He looked down at the sleeping man, and a profound, philosophical coldness settled over him. He wasn't here for a simple beating. He wasn't here for rage. He was here for a lesson, a recalibration of the world's balance sheet. He nodded to Junie. Junie stepped forward and roughly shook Miller awake. The man's eyes fluttered open, bleary and confused. They slowly focused on the two well-dressed black men standing over him, and a flicker of recognition turned to raw, animal fear. "Johnson," he croaked, scrambling backward on the cot until his back hit the stained wall. "Mr. Johnson to you," Bumpy said, his voice a quiet rumble. "We need to have a conversation, Mr. Miller, about your grasp of linguistics." Miller started to babble, a stream of panicked apologies. "I was drunk. I didn't mean it. I was just talking." "You were," Bumpy agreed, stepping closer. "And words have consequences. You see, you came into my home, my place of business, and you used a word designed to strip a man of his dignity, to remind him that in your world, he is nothing. You believe that, don't you, Mr. Miller? That I am nothing?" "No, no, I swear." Bumpy ignored him, his gaze intense. "The problem is, your world and my world, they have different rules. In your world, you can say that word and the consequences are a small article on page 14. In my world," he paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the foul air, "the consequences are more tangible, more educational." He looked at Miller's hands. They were grimy, the nails broken, but they were the hands of a man who did physical labor. The hands he used to work, to eat, to lift a bottle. The hands he might use to point, to accuse. "You see, Mr. Miller, you reduced me to a single, ugly thing. A caricature. It's only fair I do the same for you. You will no longer be a man who works at the docks. You will no longer be a man who can hold a glass steady. From now on, you will be a man who serves as a message." He nodded at Junie again. Junie pulled a small, heavy canvas roll from his coat pocket and unrolled it on the filthy floor. Inside were several gleaming tools from a mechanic's set. Miller's eyes widened in horror. He began to scream, a high-pitched, pathetic sound that was quickly muffled by Finley, who had appeared in the doorway and clamped a huge hand over his mouth. Bumpy turned his back. He did not want to watch the procedure itself. The act was beneath him, a piece of necessary but dirty work. He was a king, a general. This was a soldier's job. But he would listen. He walked to the room's single grimy window and looked out at the dark alley below. He was confronting the ugliest part of his own world, using its brutal tools to fight a battle the other world wouldn't acknowledge. He was becoming the monster they accused him of being in order to protect himself from their monstrosity. He heard a sickening, muffled crunch. Then another. He didn't flinch. He just stared out the window, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, Frank Miller was missing fingers. 2 from his right hand. The message had been prepared. Now, it was time to deliver it. Junie and Finley dragged the whimpering, bleeding man out of the room. Bumpy was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway, looking back at the empty, squalid cot. The room felt colder now, emptier. He had extracted the man, but he had left a piece of his own soul behind in that filthy place. November 15th, 1954. 4 a.m. Bumpy Johnson's brownstone. He stood in his pristine, marble-tiled bathroom, scrubbing his hands. He washed them once, twice, a third time, the soap foaming up to his wrists. But he couldn't get the feeling off. It wasn't blood. Junie's work had been surprisingly clean. It was the feeling of the flophouse. The stench of it. The feel of Miller's pathetic, abject terror clinging to him like a shroud. He had won. He had sent his message. Harlem would know their king was strong. But as he looked at his own reflection in the mirror, he saw only the profoundest exhaustion. The victory felt hollow, a mouthful of ashes. This was the beginning of his withdrawal. not from a drug, but from the venomous rage he had been forced to metabolize. For 3 days, he barely left the house. He sat in his study, the curtains drawn, a glass of untouched brandy on the table beside him. He canceled meetings. He took no calls. He was in a self-imposed prison, grappling with the consequence of his own necessary brutality. The world saw the smirk, and soon they would hear the whispers about Miller's accident at the docks. They would see the power. They wouldn't see this. The king, haunted by the ghost of a pathetic man and the ugliness he had to embrace to survive. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The fear in Miller's eyes. The sound from the other room. It wasn't guilt he felt. Miller deserved it. It was a deeper, more corrosive feeling. It was the soul sickness that comes from realizing the only tool you have to fight barbarism is a different kind of barbarism. He had proven he was a king in his world, but in doing so, he had confirmed he could never truly leave its bloody, violent shores. He was trapped by the very power that defined him. November 17, 1954. 8 p.m. The parlor. Mamie found him sitting in the dark. She didn't turn on the light. She simply sat in the armchair across from him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "The whole neighborhood is talking," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "They say a white man had an accident down by the shipyard. A man who was rude to you." Bumpy said nothing, staring into the darkness. "Is this what it takes, Ellsworth?" she asked, not with judgment, but with a deep, aching sadness. "To keep your crown? You have to dip it in blood." "I have to keep us safe," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "That man, he didn't just insult me, Mamie. He declared war. He walked into our life and reminded me that to his world, everything we've built is a joke. Our home, our money, our family. It means nothing to them. They can take it all away with a word, a rope, a crooked cop. What I did, I took away his ability to point the finger. I sent a message to all the others like him. There's a price for that kind of talk up here. A tax. And it is steep. I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know why you did it. I'm not angry about what you did to him. I'm worried about what you did to yourself. I see you, sitting in this darkness. The man I married loves poetry. He plays chess. The man who did this, he terrifies me. Not because he's violent, but because he might forget the man who loves poetry." Her words were the intervention. They cut through the fog of his psychological torment. She wasn't condemning his actions. She was trying to save his soul. She was reminding him of the man he was beyond the crown. He finally looked at her, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. "They will come for me, Mamie," he said quietly. "Not the local cops. They're on the payroll. But this makes noise. The feds. They've been looking for a way to get me for years. This is it. A white man, even a piece of trash like Miller, gets maimed by a black man. They won't let that stand. They'll build a case. Tax evasion, conspiracy, whatever they can find. They'll send me away. Then we'll fight it," she said, her voice fierce. He shook his head. "No, we won't fight. I'll let them take me." She stared at him, uncomprehending. "What? What?" "Because," he said, the terrible logic of his world crystallizing into a single, hard truth. "If I fight, they'll tear our whole world apart looking for leverage. They'll come after you, after Junie, after my businesses. They'll squeeze Harlem until it bleeds, just to get to me. But if I give them what they want, if the king falls on his own sword, they'll have their trophy. The case will be closed. The message I sent to the street will stand, and the system will have its pound of flesh. They get me, but they leave my kingdom and my family alone." This was the rehab solution. The only way to cleanse the poison was through sacrifice. To protect his family from the systemic destroyer he had provoked, he would have to feed it a piece of himself. His freedom. June 5, 1955. Federal Courthouse, Foley Square. The trial was a sham. Frank Miller, his right hand permanently bandaged, gave a shaky, inconsistent testimony. But it didn't matter. The prosecution wasn't trying Frank Miller's case. They were trying Bumpy Johnson's entire life. They used his wealth as evidence of racketeering, his influence as proof of conspiracy. The charge that stuck was a creatively engineered one: conspiracy to violate federal interstate commerce laws, tied to his numbers operation. It was a technicality, a hook to hang a king on. The jury, all white, was out for less than 2 hours. Guilty. The judge sentenced him to 15 years. He recommended incarceration at the federal penitentiary at Alcatraz, citing Johnson as a mastermind of organized crime who required the highest level of security. Bumpy stood in the courtroom, impassive. He looked at Mamie, sitting in the front row, her face a mask of dignified grief. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. He had known this was coming. This was the price. He was a chess player, and he had sacrificed his king to save the rest of the board. The systemic destroyer had won this battle, but Bumpy was playing a longer game. Witness testimony, Junius, Junie Bird. Recorded October 1988. Watching them lead him out of that courtroom. It was the hardest day of my life. He stopped by me, the marshals holding his arms. He didn't look scared. He looked calm. He leaned in close and said, "Keep the engine running, Junie. And watch over my girls." That was it. That was the order. For the next 10 years, that's what I did. I ran the business exactly as he taught me. I made sure Mamie and Elise never wanted for anything. The feds watched us, sure. But Bumpy was right. They had their big prize. They'd cut the head off the snake, they thought. They didn't realize Bumpy had taught the whole damn snake how to think for itself. July 1955 to February 1963. Alcatraz Island, San Francisco Bay/St. Nicholas Avenue, Harlem. The separation was a chasm of time and distance. Alcatraz was a world of concrete, steel, and chilling fog. It was designed to erase a man, to strip him of his name and his past. He was no longer Bumpy Johnson, king of Harlem. He was inmate AZ 1117. His life was reduced to bells, counts, and the monotonous routine of survival. But they couldn't erase him because he had an anchor. His letters to Mamie were his lifeline. August 12, 1956. My dearest Mamie, they do not allow us to see the sky much here. But sometimes, through the high windows, I can see the fog rolling over the bay. It reminds me of the steam from the grates on a cold Harlem morning. I close my eyes, and I can almost smell the coffee from the corner diner. I read the poetry you send. Rilke, he writes of solitude. He does not know the half of it. Tell Elise her drawing of the bird is on my wall. It is the only color in this gray world. Tell her Pop loves her. The years passed, measured in pages of elegant cursive and crayon drawings. He read every letter from Mamie 100 times, memorizing the details of a life he was no longer a part of. Elise learning to ride a bike. Her first day of school. The new dress she wore for Easter Sunday. He watched his daughter grow up through black and white photographs that Mamie tucked into her letters. A small girl with bright eyes and missing front teeth became a lanky preteen with a shy smile. He never wrote of the hardships of the prison, the stabbings in the yard, the crushing loneliness, the constant, grinding effort to maintain his dignity in a place designed to destroy it. Instead, he wrote of books he was reading, of philosophical questions, of his memories of their life together. He was a father and a husband, curating his existence for them, shielding them from the brutal reality of his cage. He was serving his penance, not just for the violence he'd committed, but for the life he'd chosen, a life that had led him here. The decade in prison was the final stage of his withdrawal, a long, slow purging of the rage and the pride, boiling him down to the essential man, the one who loved poetry and his family. March 10, 1963. Alcatraz Ferry Terminal, San Francisco. He had been released from Alcatraz and transferred to a federal medical center for the last few months of his parole. But his real release was today. He walked out of the terminal, a man 10 years older, thinner, with threads of gray woven through his hair. He wore an ill-fitting suit provided by the government. The world was louder, faster, more colorful than he remembered. And then he saw them. Mamie stood by a black sedan, looking as elegant and beautiful as the day he'd left. And beside her stood a young woman of 16. She was tall, with his eyes and her mother's grace. Elise. He had left a child and returned to find a woman. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. For a decade, she had been a series of photographs, a voice described in letters. Now she was real, standing 20 feet away, looking at him with a mixture of curiosity, shyness, and a deep, inherited love. He walked toward them, each step feeling like a mile. What would he say? What would she think of this old man, this ghost from her past? The fear he felt in this moment was greater than any he had felt facing down mobsters or federal judges. He stopped in front of her. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes he saw in the mirror, and his own filled with the tears that had never come on that night of rage so long ago. "Elise," he whispered, his voice cracking. She looked at him, her own eyes welling up. And then she gave him the gift he had served 10 years to earn. A small, beautiful smile broke across her face. "Hi, Pop," she said. Pop. The word was absolution. It was redemption. It was the validation of his entire sacrifice. In that single word, she swept away the gangster, the kingpin, the inmate, and left only the father. He hadn't just been protecting a kingdom of streets and numbers. He had been protecting this moment, this legacy. He pulled her into his arms, holding his daughter for the first time in a decade. He buried his face in her hair, and the last of the poison, the last of the coldness from that flophouse room and that gray prison cell, finally drained away, replaced by a warmth he thought he had lost forever. Mamie joined the embrace, her arms around them both. The Johnson family was whole again. Later, riding back to Harlem, Bumpy looked out the window. The streets were different, yet the same. His empire was still there, managed by a loyal Junie, waiting for its king to return. But the king had changed. The throne seemed smaller now, the crown heavier and less important. He had gone to war with a system and sacrificed himself to it. He had returned not to reclaim a kingdom of crime, but to inhabit a much smaller, infinitely more valuable one. A brownstone on St. Nicholas Avenue, with his wife and the daughter who called him Pop. He was still Bumpy Johnson, and the world was still a dangerous place. But he had found a peace that no enemy could ever touch again.